Hey everyone, we get a lot of questions about my setup with punching. We just released that YouTube video showing some in-depth on the water punching techniques, and basically I was trying to explain to everyone how to analyze the mats and going over some basic setups, but I want to show you how I rig and some of the things that you have to make sure that you have. So first of all, you got to have the right rod and reel and line. So the rod, I use a 711 Alpha Angler Mag Hitter, and then I use a Quantum Smoke S3. It's an 8-to-1 reel, and I know that's high speed, but I want to be able to take up that slack like I was talking in the video before. If a fish bites, I want to be able to take that slack up and move that fish with the rod. And then another key factor is you have to have very powerful fishing line. I use Cigar Smackdown. It's an 8-strand braid, 65 pound, and I like the 8-strand braid because it's smoother. You'll notice you flip it in a mat and it's like silk, this line. So some other things, I like to have a big Sharpie. And on this Sharpie, I cut a small slit in the center. That way I can color my fishing line. I just put the Sharpie in there, and you can just go up there one time with it, and it kind of camouflages that line a little bit. I don't know if that really matters because most fish that you catch or get a bite from in a mat, it's a reaction bite. So I just do it from my own head just to have a darker line going in the darker mat. And of course you need your tungsten weight. This is you usually want to use like an ounce, at least an ounce or ounce and a half, and sometimes if the stuff's really thick, I'll go to a 2 ounce. It just depends, but you need just enough weight to be able to efficiently, when you flip it onto the mat, it hits the mat, and you can either shake it a couple of times and then it goes through the mat, or you can just flip it right in there and it goes straight in first flip. But you don't want to be fighting. If your weight's not going through and you're making 10, 15 flips at a time before the weight goes through, you need to go a heavier weight. So a lot of people ask about a jig. I'll use a punch skirt before I'll ever use a jig. It just makes that jig profile, and all that does is slide on the line. You need a bait that is strong enough and has the right profile and big enough to hold a 5/0 hook. These are big hooks, wide gap, very stout hooks that won't bend when you set the hook, and you need a bait that will hold it. My favorite one is a Missile Baits D-Bomb. That's what I use for all punching pretty much. If I want a smaller profile, I go to the Missile Baits Crawfather because it is a small profile bait that will still hold a 5/0 hook. And you don't want to be constantly fighting the hook coming out of the bait. So you need to have a bait that won't tear up. You can't use a really soft bait. Well, the cool thing about a D-Bomb is the exterior is really soft, but they have an interior strip on the inside that's hard. So you still get that softness that a fish likes to hold on to, but the interior is still hard enough to hold that hook. It's very important to have those components in a bait. You need a peg of some sort. I like a rubber nail. A lot of guys like to use bobber stops. Now, the reason I like a rubber nail over a bobber stop is because I can peg that weight pretty tight, and I can snug it against my against my bait, and it keeps that head and bait as compact and tight as possible. And if you get any separation in that weight and that bait, when you flip on a mat, the weight can move a little bit forward and the bait can be a little bit back, and it makes it harder to get in the mat. To me, the tighter that weight is to that head, the more efficient it is going in and out of that mat. And so that's a big deal to me. I don't have a problem with hookups. A lot of guys like to snail knot it, and they want that weight to freely move. The theory behind the bobber stoppers is to freely move as much as possible to pop that snail knot out to hook that fish in the top of the head. But I feel like when that fish is clamped down on that weight and you set the hook, this rubber nail is not going to slow it down enough to do the same thing. But I get in and out of the mat a lot easier with a rubber nail than I would if I use bobber stops. But you can use either one, guys. That's basically a personal preference. So I'm going to show you how to rig what I got going on here. So first thing I'm going to do is put my weight on. myself some more slack here. Hung up in my hat. All right, first thing I'm gonna do is put my weight on, because if I use a rubber nail, you could put this in at any point in the rigging process. But if you use a bobber stop, you need to put that on first. Some guys use 2 bobber stops. And if you're gonna use a punch skirt, you gotta slide that on next. And all that does, these little punch skirts, this is a Delta Lures punch skirt. And so now you got your weight and your punch skirt. All that punch skirt does is slide up and down your line like that. And then there's 2 hooks I've been using. Forever I use the Hack Attack heavy cover flipping hook 5/0. You cannot bend this hook. That's the point of it. When you got 7-11 rod and 65-pound braid and you set the hook really hard, you're up close and personal with these fish. So you're usually within 10 feet of the hook set, and you got all that rod, and then you get the reaction. You get the reaction yourself from the bite, because it's so usually a violent strike that you set the hook really hard. You need the hook to be able to handle all the power you're going to deliver to that fish. If you got a 5-pounder on the line and you set the hook as hard as you can within 10 feet with a 7-11 rod, if you do not have either a Hack Attack hook, or this is another one from Gamakatsu, this is their super heavy cover. They changed their keeper. The downfall of this hook is eventually that keeper will get loose, but they relatively have the same gap between the two. So they're about the same, but the Gamakatsu is a little bit longer shank, so it gets a little bit further down the bait. So I've been experimenting with these 2. They're both great hooks, but I don't know for sure which one I like more. The Hack Attack hook has pretty much a straight U bend. The Gamakatsu hook has a little bit of a downward bend, is the reason I like this hook right now. I've been having really good success with it, so it has a little bit better penetration. The fish tends to stay hooked a little bit better. So back to the rigging. All right, so we got the skirt on there, and this is the thing. I tie a snail, and I always tie a snail. Some people are on the fence about tying a snail and wondering if it's beneficial or not. The thing I do know is it doesn't hurt to tie the snail. Now, whether it gives me an extra hookup or 2 throughout the hook setting process throughout the day, I cannot confirm that. I haven't been able to do a reasonable enough test between the snail and the polymer knot to find out which one I prefer, but I do know it doesn't hurt. So if there's a possibility that the snail knot will give me another hookup or 2 or land me another fish or 2 throughout the day, I'm just going to go to the snail knot. So I tie the snail knot all the time whenever I'm flipping with braid, pretty much. But the snail knot is very important to go through the front of the eye, because if you do not go through the front of the eye where the point is, then that snail knot's not going to properly work. So you come through the eye like this, and then you pinch the line, and then you fold it back. So the thing is, at this point, you're going to start wrapping the line. It doesn't matter which direction you wrap it, but you're going to wrap it around the shank like so. Now, if you watch tutorials on the snail knot, a lot of people sit there and they'll just tell you wrap it 4, 5, 6 times. I'll wrap it as many times as I can down the shank. Now, I'll tell you another benefit of this Gamakatsu versus the Hack Attack. I like the Hack Attack keeper better, but the Hack Attack hook isn't welded at the eye. So my solution to that was wrap it as tight and as many times as you can around the shank, and that wouldn't allow this. Eventually the line would pop through the non-welded part into the eye, and it could cause you a problem. It didn't happen very often, but if you didn't do those continuous wraps all the way down the shank, then it would happen more than you wanted it to. But instead of wrapping it 4 or 5 times, you can see I'm kind of shoving this line down the shank right here just to get as many wraps as I can. And this is to me, a big deal, because you don't want that snail knot slipping around the shank. So as you can see, I got the line wrapped around the shank. It's a really simple knot, and then you're left with this loop right here, this little tag loop that you made initially. And all you do is you slide that thing through the loop, and I'm keeping my finger on these wraps I made to keep them tight, and then you pull this pressure from the main line. Hop it over the weed guard. And you pull it tight. Now you can see that whole shank's wrapped. It's a very, very strong knot. It's not gonna move. And when I clip the tag, I always leave myself a significant tag in. Just because there's no reason not to have it. And when you're using braid, you just want to make sure stuff's not going to slip. So I leave myself a significant tag in. And so now I have my punch skirt and my hook. So the snail knot's important because when it hits the hook, it pops that hook out. You see that? That's how it works. And if you don't go through the front of the eye like you're supposed to, then it'll blow your hook backwards. Now, the theory is when you set the hook and you put pressure on this weight, this helps find a spot in the fish's mouth. If you notice, if you watch live, whenever I did the punching tutorial on Major League Fishing's page, a lot of times a fish will eat the bait so good that they clamp down on the weight, and you'll set the hook, you'll literally pull the fish out of the mat, have him come into the boat, and the fish will spit the bait, and you'll never get a hook in that fish's mouth. Well, when that happens fairly often, so the thing is with the snail knot, it just exposes that hook more. Whenever that hook is directly behind the bait, and that if you had just a regular polymer knot, you're pulling with a direct force away from the fish's mouth. And if that fish got the whole weight and you blow his mouth open and that hook's following, basically the hook is following in line with the weight. If you blow his mouth open and that hook's directly in line, it's just gonna follow that weight right out. And to me, you have a less of a chance of catching that fish somewhere in the mouth. With that snail knot, when it pops out to the side and you pull and you set the hook and it engages that snail knot and that weight's coming, that hook's off to the side following it, and you can catch that fish somewhere in the mouth. So that's why I tie a snail knot all the time. So then you put your plastic on, and usually I go a little bit deeper in the plastic with this Gamakatsu hook because it's got the shank's further down, but I usually go down to the third rib. Right there, you can see I got 1, 2, 3 ribs, and I pop out in the center. Then you roll that thing over. You give yourself a little bit of plastic. You don't want to expose it or point the hook through there, but that's pretty much your setup right there with the skirt on it. And then you can see if you didn't use a punch skirt, most of the time I go straight Texas rig. I don't even waste my time with the punch skirt, but you can see how important it is, that 5/0 hook, having the right plastic for it to sit in. And then the weight sits right on top of it. So that would be your punch rig. And then being that I didn't use bobber stops and I used a nail, these are like some extra thick ones. You need the ones that have the thick end and the real sharp point, because I can peg a 2-ounce tungsten. The bigger the tungsten is, the bigger the interior hole gets on the weight. So you need a nail that will fill the hole up and actually serve the purpose of its pegging. So I'll put that in there from the bottom. Then I'll pull this tight a little bit. Get it kind of tight, but you don't want to get it as tight as possible because you still want that weight to slide. Then I'll put a little bit of pressure with these 2 fingers in this and I'll pull that plastic a little bit and I'll snip it right at the head. And what that does is that causes that thing to contract and go back into the weight a little bit. And then I'll do the same thing on this end. I'll pull it and I'll snip it, and that's all in there. And then you got a pretty tight weight. And I'll snug that thing down right to it. So I know there's no movement between that weight, and if my bobber stops slide up an inch, that weight gets away from the bait. I know you wouldn't, it'll blow your mind on how much of a difference it makes to have that weight right up against it, because it directly pulls that bait in. And when you're flipping hyacinth mats over and over throughout the day, and you're gonna make, say, 1,500 flips, if I can get 50 or 100 of those flips to go in the mat more efficiently, because I'm telling you, a lot of times I'm going through and I want to get in a spot and I'm flipping on the mat, I'm flipping on it. Eventually I give up and I go on and make the next flip. That right there could have cost me a 6 or 7 pound fish. You'll flip in a spot in your head, you're like, man, that's a perfect mat, it's on the end of a lay down, but it may have been just too thick for your weight to go through, so you make 5 or 6 flips and you're like, oh, well, and you just go on to the next mat. Well, you never had an opportunity to fish that was sitting underneath it. Most of the time, the hardest mats to flip into are your most likely place to get a bite, because a lot of people may have gone through that area and tried to flip that same spot and couldn't, and didn't get their weight in there, so that fish is not really getting fished for very hard if you're in a popular punching area. But if your weight's set up perfectly and you got the right weight for the situation, or sometimes I'll have a 2 ounce on the deck, an ounce and a half, and a 1 ounce. I'll pick up that 2 ounce and I'll make that pitch and I'll bust through the mat and I'll get that bite if I didn't give up. So be persistent if you know a fish is in an area and it's hard to get your bait in the hole, because you can capitalize on those situations. This is my punching box. I use the Bass Mafia Tackle terminal coffin, and you know, I have all my weights in here. This is what a 2 ounce looks like. It's a really heavy duty weight right there. 2 ounce, ounce and a half, ounce and a quarter, 1 ounce, 3/4, and then I got my my big heavy duty flipping hooks in here. Pretty much everything that's in this part is new. That's ready for a tournament, and then as I get through use hooks, I just keep them right here in this little bag, and that is basically what I use to practice with or fun fish. And I have brand new hooks here that I pull out for the tournament, and then I keep, this is a little bag with about 15 punch skirts in it. Punch skirts, they don't take up very much room, and I keep those right here. That's why I had this little rubber band around, and that stays right there. And I got some bobber stops, and I keep my rubber nails right here. So pretty simple little setup, and that's about it. Make sure you have a big rod, 65 pound braid, and a big hook, and then you can experiment with plastics, use whatever ones you want. I like the missile-based D-bomb. I'm still yet to find one that works better than that. Punch skirt sometimes, or you can go without a punch skirt. I feel like no punch skirts gets more bites, but maybe with a punch skirt it might get you bigger bites. It's just kind of depends on, you got to feel that out during practice. But and then your marker, color your line, and you should be good to go. So let me know if you have any specific questions. Go back and watch the video where I'm on the water talking about how to analyze the mats and things like that. And this was just a tutorial to show you how I rig it, my setup, and the variations that you can have between hooks and punch skirt or not or whatever. So thanks for following along. Make sure you click like or follow the YouTube channel, and or subscribe to the YouTube channel, and we'll try to keep everybody as educated as possible. And if you have any specific questions, feel free to reach out. Flipping hooks in here.